So we stayed with the casket all the time.
Except when they broke away to practice, 6 pallbearers became 8 to shoulder the weight of Kennedy's heavy mahogany casket. Up and down the steps they rehearsed for this climb to the Capitol.
We put a person on top of the casket, filled the casket with sandbags, and practiced carrying it up, keeping it level.
For decades, the story of John F. Kennedy's assassination has been dissected from every possible angle. Yet one element continues to linger in the shadows. What happened to his original coffin? It's a detail many people have never heard, and for those who have, the explanation has never felt entirely satisfying. The chaotic hours after the assassination. In the immediate aftermath of the assassination, confusion and urgency shaped every decision made around President Kennedy's body. Officials in Dallas were focused on protocol, the Secret Service was focused on security, and Jackie Kennedy was focused on staying close to her husband. That combination produced a rushed, emotionally charged environment, one in which a hastily selected, extremely heavy, and ultimately impractical coffin was chosen. The casket itself, an expensive bronze model, had been retrieved from O'Neill's funeral home in Dallas within minutes of the shooting. It was ornate, dignified, and entirely wrong for what followed. After the body was transported to Washington for the autopsy at Bethesda Naval Hospital, technicians quickly realized the coffin had been damaged on the flight and during handling. Blood had seeped into the lining. The structure warped. It was not fit for a state funeral. That would be concerning enough on its own. But what happened in the days that followed showed the coffin's problems were only beginning, and so were the strange decisions surrounding it. As officials debated what to do with the damaged casket, internal memos began circulating between General Services Administration and other federal offices. One of those memos contained a striking line that laid bare the government's thinking at the time. Quote, "I believe that the public interest requires that this casket be disposed of." It's a stark sentence, one that suggests not only concern, but urgency. Why exactly was disposing of the coffin considered a matter of public interest, and why the need for such decisive language? Those questions hang over the historical record even today. What we do know is this: the officials believed the damaged coffin posed a problem, and they wanted that problem solved quickly and quietly. The inconsistency between the coffin's symbolic importance and the government's eagerness to remove it from history is one of the first signs that something about the chain of decisions didn't quite add up. A relic no one wanted to keep. Once a new coffin was selected, a different, more polished casket would ultimately be used in both the White House viewing and the Arlington burial. The original Dallas coffin no longer had a purpose, yet its existence created complications. This was not just any piece of history, it was the object that had carried a slain president across state lines. It bore the mark of tragedy, and perhaps for that reason, no one wanted to deal with it. Federal officials worried the coffin could someday become a morbid attraction. In internal discussions, the phrase kept appearing, a fear that someone, somewhere, might attempt to display it, sell it, or exploit it. By the mid-60s, that concern grew serious enough that the General Services Administration revisited the issue. They weren't merely considering storage or transfer, they were weighing whether the coffin should be destroyed. That escalating anxiety is preserved in a later GSA communication published by the National Archives, where the rationale was spelled out in even more unambiguous terms. Quote, "To permit its retention would be contrary to the public interest." This wasn't the language of simple housekeeping, it was the language of alarm, an insistence that the coffin's continued existence posed some undefined risk. The record doesn't explain exactly what that risk was supposed to be, nor why the government believed its disposal was necessary for the public good. What is clear is that by 1966, discussions within federal offices had shifted from concern to action. Plans were quietly drafted to remove the coffin from storage at the National Archive, transport it under tight supervision, and eliminate it entirely. Not repurpose it, not preserve it, not archive it, eliminate it. And that leads to one of the strangest parts of the story, the manner in which they chose to do it. The secretive disposal at sea. When the government finally moved to destroy the original coffin, the operation was carried out with deliberate secrecy. There was no public announcement, no ceremony, no archival tagging indicating where the coffin might someday be found. Instead, under the supervision of federal agents and the U.S. Air Force, the casket was loaded onto a C-130 cargo plane and flown out over the Atlantic Ocean. What happened next is documented in a number of historical summaries, including one from History.com, which notes that federal officials intentionally chose a method that would leave no trace. Among their reasoning was a desire to prevent the coffin from ever resurfacing, physically or symbolically, as a relic of national trauma. As the article explains, quote, "The damaged casket used to transport Kennedy's body from Dallas was later destroyed at sea to prevent it from becoming a morbid attraction. Federal agents oversaw the flight. The coffin was weighted down with sandbags, bound with straps, and dropped into waters more than 9,000 feet deep. Once it vanished below the waves, the plane circled the site to ensure it could not be seen floating or resurfacing. It's a dramatic image, one that raises more questions than it answers. Why was this the appropriate remedy? Why a cargo plane? Why the middle of the ocean? Why did officials see the coffin's destruction not just as an option, but as an urgent necessity? On the surface, the explanation is simple. A damaged coffin could attract the wrong kind of attention. But that feels incomplete. Objects associated with tragedy are routinely archived, preserved, or respectfully stored. They're not typically destroyed, let alone dropped into the ocean under controlled conditions. A decision wrapped in bureaucracy. On paper, the decision to eliminate JFK's original coffin was framed as a matter of policy, practicality, and public sensitivity. But once you peel back the official language and look at how the decision evolved, a more complicated picture emerges, one shaped by bureaucracy, fear of public reaction, and perhaps an unspoken desire to keep certain aspects of the assassination out of the national spotlight. Multiple agencies were involved in the discussions: the General Services Administration, the National Archives, the Kennedy family, and even the Department of Defense. Each contributed its own perspective, yet the tone of the interdepartmental communication always seemed to circle back to the same idea. Remove the coffin, remove the problem. What stands out most is how carefully the government tiptoed around the public. They worried about sensationalism, about conspiracy theorists, about the possibility of someone misusing the coffin for profit or spectacle, but they did not appear to consider the historical value of preserving it, nor did they acknowledge that destroying such an artifact, especially one so deeply tied to national trauma, might actually fuel more suspicion than it resolved. A symbol too powerful to preserve? There's a certain irony that the government's claim the coffin could become a morbid attraction. From a historical standpoint, many items linked to tragedies have been thoughtfully and respectfully preserved. The clothes Abraham Lincoln wore at Ford's Theater, the limousine in which Ronald Reagan was shot, even artifacts from darker, more painful moments are archived, studied, and contextualized. So why was Kennedy's coffin treated differently? Its significance was undeniable. It represented the chaotic transition of power, the shock of a nation, the vulnerability of a moment that changed the course of history. In many ways, it was more than a burial vessel. It was a time capsule of grief and shock, messy, imperfect, and undeniably real. Preserving it would have meant acknowledging that chaos. It would have meant allowing researchers, historians, and the public to confront the tangible aftermath of the assassination. Destroying it avoided that confrontation. There's also the question of what it actually contained, not physically but symbolically. It had been present during the most debated period on the aftermath, the transport from Dallas to Bethesda, the hours before and after the autopsy, the moment-by-moment handling of the president's body. These were the very hours that have generated decades of speculation, alternative theories, and mistrust. Erasing the coffin effectively erased one of the few remaining physical witnesses to that timeline. Now it's time to hear from you. What's the most surprising part of this surprising story? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below.